Begin this evening with a short video of Swamiji speaking.
With Master, and he said that it's very difficult in the beginning, but I have to take on a new personality. It feels a bit like an itchy overcoat on a hot day. One time I was with Master, and he said that it's very difficult at the beginning, but I have to take on a new personality. It feels a bit like an itchy overcoat on a hot day, and then I get used to it, it's okay. So Master was not that personality. He was the infinite consciousness, that he expressed himself in that personality. Master told me this story. He said there was a man who was being bothered by a demon, and he knew that a mantra in the scriptures, if you repeat this mantra, then you will cast over a little powder and throw the powder on the demon. This demon will vanish. So he said the mantra over the demon and threw the powder on the demon, and the demon laughed. He said, before you even say your mantra, I myself got in the powder. The meaning of that story is the very ego with which you're trying to free yourself is already poisoned by its own delusion. You can't get out of it. It's trying to lift yourself from a horse by pulling on your hair. Van Munchausen did it in the German stories of preposterous lies. No ordinary human being could do it. And what you have to do is get in tune with somebody who's already free. He doesn't want to make you like himself, but he wants to give you his consciousness. And I have found that by tuning myself to my Guru, I understand things that I could never have understood otherwise, like that Bhagavad Gita, like many things. I have found that he guides me in everything. And I know that without his help, I wouldn't get anywhere. But you do have to use your ego to this extent too. You have to will yourself out of your ego. You have to want to get out of it. As long as you want to be yourself, as long as, the ego is centered to the medulla oblongata. That's here at the base of the spine, at the base of the brain. And the superconsciousness is centered here. A master has his consciousness completely centered here. You can see that in looking at Yogananda. If you study his photograph sensitively, you'll feel this is where his ego is. But an egotist, a very strong egotist, look at man, looking down his nose at everybody. All his tension is here. Then you can see people, if you're sensitive, as they meditate, as they become more spiritual, their energy begins to move forward in the brain. And you can see it in their faces. That's why I was saying they all look so lovable up here singing. Because you're getting free from that ego. That's what the spiritual path is all about. We have to get rid of this ego. When you get rid of the ego, then you attain that state. Bit like that, yes, not quickly, but bit like that. An avatar is somebody who has reached that state of oneness with God and then comes down with the power of God to help other people. He can free any number of people. Oh, Guru was such an avatar. He said, and this is a sign of the incredible, you can't speak of him as a personality, but yet his kindness was unbelievable, so great. In his poem, God's Boatman, he said, I will come back to this world, if need be 1 trillion times, as long as one stray brother is suffering by the wayside. And he said to us, I killed Yogananda long ago. No one dwells in this temple now but God. He showed that in his personality. That kind of compassion, most people, when they attain liberation, they just think, thank God, I'm out of it. They don't want to come back. Very few people have this thought, to suspend their complete merging in that absolute bliss, to come back and help other people. We have to realize what a sacrifice the masters make for us. Jesus too, Babaji too, Larimaja, Sri Yukteswar. It's a great thing to have. We're very blessed.
Well, that was a nice way to end it, with him saying we are very blessed, and leaving it at that, because that for sure is the truth. We're blessed to be able to have such an example as Swamiji. I'd like to begin by reading a passage all of you know very, very well, and I can almost quote this from heart, but I thought I'd better read it just in case. This is from the very beginning of the autobiography of a yogi. The characteristic features of Indian culture have long been a search for ultimate verities and the concomitant disciple-guru relationship. My own path led me to a Christ-like sage whose beautiful life was chiseled for the ages. He was one of the great masters, or India's sole remaining wealth, emerging in every generation. They have bulwarked their land against the fate of Babylon and Egypt. And I read that, and we read that when we read the autobiography of a yogi, and we quote it many times, this disciple-guru relationship. And oftentimes, I would say the majority of times when we read that and we think about that, we're talking about, yes, that relationship, but we think about the side of the guru, perhaps, more than we do the side of the disciple. And in culture, in India, we have Guru Purnima. We honor that, they have a special day for the guru. But there also needs to be a day also. Sometime we need to have that day when we honor the other side of that equation, because it's a relationship, one to the other, passing down generation to generation to generation, because a true disciple is a rare thing indeed. Swami Kriyananda used to say many times that he said, when in the early days when I first met him, he even quoted that statement. He says, because he had mentioned to me that he had been to India, and he had told people, he says, oh yes, there are many, many, many gurus in India, very few disciples. And I thought, yes, and he was making it as a joke, of course, but in terms of the relationship, the importance of the relationship of the two, the guru, you could say, he's a free soul. And I always remembered that story of Ramakrishna, who was great guru, when he was standing on the top of his bedroom apartment there, and he was calling, where are my disciples? And he was calling them to him. Where? Come. He wanted disciples to come to him. And one by one, of course, they did. And in the same way, one by one, disciples came to Master as well. And we have in Swamiji, I think and this was actually what he said about himself, is that he wanted to be a good disciple. I mean, he used that word good very modestly, because he was a great disciple. And this was the formative, you might say, the aspiration for him in this lifetime, was to be a perfect disciple, his ability to be that. And so he exemplifies to us, and we can gain much from studying his life in terms of how we too can emulate that, how to be a good disciple, how to be able to fulfill that side of the equation, because it's the disciple in the perfection of that discipleship that begins to draw the power of the guru. It's said in the Bible, to all those, Christ said, to all those who received him, gave he the power to become the sons of God. And that's what the disciples, all of us as disciples, we want that power to become the disciple, or to become the sons of God. And we draw that power to all those who received him. Now, many people, perhaps first reading that or hearing that statement, would think, oh, I want to receive. I'm receptive. I'm open. Certainly I want to be a good disciple, and perhaps I accept Master as my teacher, my guru, or some other path I accept as a guru. But the realization comes as one goes deeper into these teachings that we cannot approach discipleship from the position of passively opening ourselves to that power to come into us. It's not about being passive and open and waiting for that to come into us. That receptivity, we think of it as just receptiveness, as we draw something into ourselves, but yet we draw it into ourselves. It's something that drawing that power of the Master into us, of being a disciple, is something that takes a great deal of energy, a great deal, as Swamiji was saying, of will. We have to use the will. We have to use all of our faculties to be able to open ourselves, to be able to draw that power into us. And Swami exemplified that. We find that any true disciple, anybody who undertakes a spiritual path, knows that it seems perhaps at first like a smooth sailing for many people when we come onto the spiritual path, because we're blessed. I think God blesses us and gives us perhaps experiences, enticements. You might say, come. But little does the disciple, sometimes the incipient disciple, realize what's going to be asked. And when that, you might say, that initial romance begins to fade and we have to do the work that is required, then we find, oh, am I up for this? Do I really want to do this? And we find that it takes a great deal of courage to be able to take the steps necessary on the spiritual path to achieve our goal. A true discipleship is a courageous path to open ourselves to God's grace. And when we think of God's grace, we think of pleasant blessings. But God's grace comes in many forms. When Swamiji was tossed out of Self-Realization Fellowship, it was his most difficult time, as he said, in his life, because he was at that point a man in his mid-30s, in the prime of his life, had dedicated his complete life to God since the age of 22, knew no other life. And you might say he was tossed out of that organization, not by his doing. It was something, karmic situation. So he was in a very difficult state of mind for some years after that, a few years after that. And because he had been close to Anandamoyi Ma, he wrote to her, and he found that doors closed, that he couldn't go to India to actually see her. Karmic doors closed on him, preventing him. He was accused of being a CIA spy. So India wouldn't grant him a visa. And it was nonsense, of course. But so he wrote. And he poured his heart out to Ma. And she wrote back and she said, take this as your Guru's grace, your Guru's blessings. And Swami, and years later, said, he read that and he understood what she was saying intellectually, but in his heart, he says, that was the one thing I could not accept it at that time, to see this as my Guru's grace. Because God comes in blessings, and that are nice things, but remember, blessings are not necessarily, by definition, things that we like. And to be able to accept everything that comes to us, it's Guru's blessings, Guru's grace, that takes a great deal of courage. And so Swami came to realize, of course, that this really was Guru's grace, and he came to realize how wrong he was in that unacceptance for a little while after that traumatic circumstances. But he had that courage to be able to accept and be open to everything that came. Just merely being passive is not enough. Swami would often say, there are many disciples who they perhaps are disciples in name, but he would use the story of Master saying about Mount Washington. He said, on Mount Washington, Master said, there are many rats and mice on this mountain. They're not finding God. And so consequently, just to be in the proximity of a great saint does not guarantee anything. We have to be able to draw that power by our own openness, our humility, our willingness to act as a channel. And that is what Swamiji emphasized or exemplified in his life. He was an example of somebody who took everything, and eventually in his life, as time passed, many blessings came to him of the positive and negative kind both. His life was not an easy life, and he often said that his horoscope had predicted that somebody had read his horoscope and said, "Oh my God, you've got a very difficult horoscope, and how is your life? And how is your life?" And so, that's just okay, it's going along. And he said, but by your horoscope, you have a lot of obstacles in your life. And so the normal person would say, "Oh my gosh, that's a bad omen." But Swami said, no. It was actually a good omen for those people who have the power and the strength and the courage to face those obstacles, you see. And this is what Master said. Master said an easy life is not necessarily a successful life at all. We have to be able to overcome those obstacles. And actually, Master went so far to say that this life to finding God is martyrdom. We have to be willing to be martyrs for God, but not so much martyrs of the body in this age, martyrs of the ego, the sense of littleness, this sense of small self. And this takes a lot of courage to just put it aside. That Swami was talking about transferring that sense of self from the medulla oblongata to the point here. It's like, you might say, like pulling teeth out, and nobody likes to do that, especially without Novocaine, as Swami would often say when he had his teeth worked on. This is what we face. And Swami in his life demonstrated that. We know from Swami's life that he first came to Master through the autobiography of a yogi. And I think this is common for probably many, many of us. We first were introduced to Master through his AY, the autobiography, and Master said he put his vibrations on it and into it. And Swamiji met that book. He was introduced to it in a bookstore, Fifth Avenue in New York City, and he opened the book and perused it a little bit, but put it back because he saw that dedication page to Luther Burbank, that it was dedicated an American saint, and Swami was so somewhat, he couldn't believe that there could be such a thing as an American saint, and so he put it back and walked out. But later came back and bought it. He was went out into the street, and you might say Master pulled him back. Now this is interesting because that's not an unusual story. Other people have had that experience too. I remember when I first read the autobiography, I got a little bit past Luther Burbank, but I read page 1, and then I probably got to page 2, and Master starts to talk about memories of past lives in Himalayan snows and the yogis. And I thought, oh no, this is a mystical fantasy, one of those books, and I looked at it, I don't want to read this, and I put it back. But again, I went out, and it was a day later, I just had to go back and buy that book. And I was pulled back to that bookstore and almost running, because I said, I got to buy that book. And I ran back to the bookstore and got it. And that power was there. And Swami, of course, as he took the next bus, and a few days later, he got on the bus, went to Hollywood Church. It was Hollywood Church that he met Master there. And the first words he said to Yogananda was, I want to be your disciple. And Master, after a bit of consideration, asking Swamiji a few questions, accepted him, said he had good karma, and that he wasn't accepting many people these days, but Divine Mother had told him to see him, Swamiji, Donald Walters at that time, and he did and accepted him as a brother and a monk into the order. And Swami immediately said, from that moment on, after being blessed by Master, his life changed. And he became a different person. And I think in all of us is when we become and take on the mantle of discipleship, in a sense, we're taking on Master. We're taking on our Guru. We're taking on those blessings. And if we're sensitive and we're open and we're receptive, we see that our lives too very subtly change. And we find that we become a new person. And the important point for us in this is not to be like many who become disciples in name only, and then that momentary inspiration begins to fade, but is to reawaken in whatever way we can that inspiration that came to us at first, that drove us, impelled us perhaps to read that book, to take up these teachings, to begin to meditate, however difficult and struggling it was. What was it? And recall that initial inspiration and live in that inspiration continually again and again and again, because that's what it impels us. The quote that I remember Swami saying from when he was led to Yogananda, he said he had reached in his life a point of desperation. He was desperate. He wanted something other than what he had. He knew his life was empty, and he was desperate to change. Now, change is not an easy thing. We have to want to change. Really desperate. In Swami's case, he says desperately. He was desperate to change. And desperation isn't the state of mind that we like to live in for very long, because it impels us towards something. But nevertheless, it's good to remember, because that whatever it was that impelled you to take up this path, whether it was desperation or whether it was perhaps maybe a positive side, you had something that inspired you, whatever it was, remember that and keep that close to you, because this is what our life should be motivated by, will be successful, is motivated by those experiences, those feelings, those thoughts we had that led us to become disciples. And then meditate on this concept or on this thought. What does it mean to be a perfect disciple? Swamiji was continually, throughout his life, he always referred back to Master. He would say, he often didn't understand, particularly in the early days, but he said, if Master said it, then it must, for him, it was true. And he was just absolute that he would be loyal to Master and Master's word. And so it was throughout his life. If Master had done something in a certain way, that's how it should be. I remember I once wrote to him, Swamiji, a letter, and I had some modification in my practice, my sadhana practice that I had found very inspiring, and I wanted to do, and it was going nicely for me, and but I was sort of thinking, well, it was sort of a little wasn't the way things are taught, put it that way. And so I thought, well, I better ask about this. So I wrote Swami, and I said, Swami, what about this? I've been having really good results with practicing this way, and I described it all. And in my usual way, took a long time doing it. And and a day or two later, he wrote me back just a really little note. And it just said, Master said to do it this way. That's all he said. And he didn't say I was wrong. He didn't say I should, that he didn't debate it, go into it. He just said, Master said to do it this way. And let it be up to me. What do I want to do? He left it up to me. And I thought about that, and I thought about that, and I said, Master said to do it this way. Well, maybe Master knew what he was talking about. So I went back, I did it that. And that's how Swami was, because he was a brilliant man. He knew all of the ways that things could be done, lots of different techniques. He knew there was nothing that you could nothing you could ask him that he didn't have an answer for. But yet, he always came back. What did Master say? That's what I'm going to be as a representative of that. That's what I'm going to share. And one of the things I think, if I could leave you with a little piece of advice that has been very helpful to me, is that I think one of the keys is we need to make our discipleship an active part of our life. In other words, we need to be active disciples and to express that discipleship in some way. And I think one of the ways to do that is through service, finding some way in this life, in some way in life in general, that we can be of service. And what that means is doing something that we're expressing Master in Master's name. Now, I don't mean literally his name. I mean in his spirit. That we're allowing Master to work through us in some fashion. We're doing it for God. We're doing it for Guru, and something in life that we're doing consciously and explicitly for Guru. Now, obviously, you could say everything should be done for Guru. I mean, that's true. But people will often say, well, it's all God. It's all wrong, and then, of course, they go about their business doing whatever they're doing, and it has less meaning. We need to bring it to a point of do something. Do in some way in your life, be serviceful. And doing it for Master, and to do it for Guru's, doing it for Guru. And I was thinking, this is one thing, I mentioned this because if I look back on what Swami gave me, many things, of course, he gave me, but one thing that was very, very significant is he gave me a way to serve. When I met him, he immediately drew me in and asked me to do things, little things, not giving discourse or anything like that, but why don't you come and help set up the chairs? Oh, okay, I can do that because, a young fellow, I could set up chairs. And I often have told people over years, if you're going to be a leader, center leader like Aditya or any of the center leaders, you have two jobs: raise money and set up chairs. It kind of seems to come down in some fashion to some iteration of those. But he gave me a way to serve, and then from that he invited me. He says, "Why don't you go up and help us get this retreat started up in the mountains? Why don't you?" He asked me to do something, and I was a young fellow, full of energy, wanting to do something. I wanted to be useful. Now, I wanted to be useful in life in general, and that's why I couldn't get started on any career. I couldn't see any usefulness of going into corporate or going into, why? Make money, do nothing. And it didn't have any meaning to me. So I wanted to do something real useful. And so he invited me. And I think and it was service. It was all serviceful. And I think that's something that I've found in my life, is do something of service. Whatever it is, it really doesn't matter so much outwardly, but if you're serving Guru's work, then you're active in your discipleship. And so don't always find something in those ways, and you'll find that in that you become an instrument for Guru's grace. You become an instrument for sharing Guru. Now, obviously, we want to do that in everything we do. We're the face of Master's work in day-to-day life. When people see us, then we're sharing Master with them. And if we can work in that spirit all the time, that's even better yet. And so I'm going to leave it at that. And in a moment, I'm going to ask Sadhana Devi to come forward. And she's going to also share. But what her part is, we're going to give all of us who are disciples a chance to renew our discipleship vows. She's going to read the discipleship vows, and then as we do, we'll repeat them. But I know some of you here, many are disciples, perhaps many are not disciples. That's okay. Those of you who are not disciples, listen to these words, to this vow. And I think Sadhana is going to explain a little bit about some of the meaning of what Swami's intention was, why he wrote what he did write, because they're inspiring, and they give the attitude, the direction that we as disciples, as devotees, want to take our lives. And so she'll explain that part, and when that part comes, we'll all stand, and she'll lead us in the discipleship ceremony. And then after the discipleship ceremony, we'd like to invite everybody to come up and receive a blessing. And at the blessing, we're going to give you two things. We're going to put some rose petals. We came back from Italy just recently, on our way back from America, passing through Italy. And that's, as you know, that's where Swami passed on in 2013. And in his kutir where he lived, there's the bed where he was lying as he passed on. And there's always, when people come in there's always rose petals being put on the bed, and they let them stay there, and then eventually they dry. And they collect those rose petals, and then they give them out to devotees. And so we brought back a packet of rose petals. We'd like to give you, and I think we have enough for everybody, of some of those rose petals from Swamiji's bed where he passed on, in remembrance of that. And we'd also like to give you a little picture of Swami Kriyananda as well. And so we'll do that at the blessing ceremony when it comes for that time. So I'd like now to invite Sadhana Devi is her name, and I knew who that was. And what's her name? And she can say a few words, and then we'll have our ceremony.
As well. Doesn't take long to realize that, for example, that letting go of the ego is not an easy task. The likes and dislikes, the emotions, all of the things that go with the attachments, all of the things that go with ego are there quite strongly for us and reminding us. And we find that it's very easy to get discouraged. The Guru is there to help us, to give us some of his strength, you might say, to give us power that we don't possess at the beginning. But as we learn to depend on the Guru, to look to the Guru, to have the Guru in our hearts all the time, then we begin to draw the grace of the Guru. And Swamiji wrote this, the vow of discipleship, as a way for us to affirm our commitment to this path, this particular path, and to the pursuit of the grace of God that is takes a will that is something, as Jaya was saying, it's not something passive. It requires great will. But even the will itself comes from the Guru. And as we open our hearts, we then are able to draw that kind of energy we need in order to have that kind of will. Swamiji, I'm pretty sure, he used to talk sometimes about monasteries in the West and how they were, particularly in the past, and I don't know how they are now, but how they tended to put on the monastics a sense of obedience. They talked about obedience. And obedience, in the case that he was speaking of, was a matter of submitting or being submissive to your superior in your monastery, wherever you were. And he wanted to get away from that sort of attitude. Instead, he talked about cooperative obedience. Yes, it is quite necessary to realize that the Guru and the Guru's representatives are there for our help, and that we need to draw their grace. And one of the ways that we draw their grace is to do what they tell us to do. This is attunement. And by doing this, we then are able to draw what we need to help us to make progress on the spiritual path. And so, as I say, he spoke of cooperative obedience. And it reminded me also of something when he talked about the Christian or the Western traditions. It reminded me of something that little children, particularly in the West, are told in their religion, their Christian religion. They're told about a guardian angel, that they have guardian angels. And that reminded me of a picture, a painting that I saw many years ago by a German artist I had never heard of. Two little children are walking across a raging river on a very, very unstable bridge. The two of them are holding hands, and they're walking across as though they're out on a walk at some lovely garden somewhere. They're just looking perfectly content and normal, and as though nothing is wrong. Even though when you look at the picture, you see what's down below, far below, and a very, very rickety bridge that looks quite unstable. But behind them is their guardian angel. She's got her arms outstretched. She has her white wings. And she's very beautiful, and she's protecting them. And children hear from their parents from the time they're very small about their guardian angel who's taking care of them, and as they're protecting them always. Now, it doesn't always seem to come out as protection. Sometimes they get themselves in big trouble. But they do have that something to depend on, to remember that their guardian angel is there with them always. And when Swamiji wrote this discipleship vow, it began to remind me of what the Guru does for us. The Guru does something like a guardian angel does. But we have to draw that energy and the will and the grace. We have to do that through our own efforts. We can't be passive, but through our efforts, we can draw what we need to make progress, to be able to set aside all the ego's stuff that it bothers us with. We have all of that by drawing the grace of the Guru by our will. And the vow that we have today helps us to affirm what it is that we're doing, to remind us again. I've seen people who take their vow home and they put it in a frame and it's on the wall, something they can read every day easily, to remind them We're here because the Guru is here for us. It's a great blessing to have the Guru, to have a Guru at all, and to have a Guru that's an avatar. Avatars that come back, who don't need to come back, but they come back for us. That's a great blessing. And to take a vow of discipleship affirms that we are making this commitment to this spiritual path and to this Guru to bring us back, to bring us home, to bring us to self-realization. Ready? So we'll begin by my reading it for everyone, and you'll be listening. Then I will read the last part. Sorry, for those who are disciples. So, Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Kriyananda, Paramahansa Yogananda.
For this first part, just listen, and then the second part will repeat.
Okay. Swami Sri Yukteswar, Paramahansa Yogananda, I bow to you all. Divine Mother, I come before thee today, having long sought thy eternal light, long pondered the eternal truths, long followed the winding path that leads to thee. I have walked with my own strength, all too seldom with thine. I have walked with the thought, I want this from life, these answers, that guidance, this pathway or that. But I have seen that as often as I made claims on life, it eluded me. As often as I presumed on thy will, it turned away from me. Ah, too long, Mother, have I sought thee for myself, not for thy love. I know now that without thy strength added to mine, infusing it, I shall never find thee. Thine is the power, the grace, the infinite glory. With loving faith now I seek thee through the ray of thy light that thou hast offered me. I will ascend to thee, not by my power alone, but by the power of thy infinite love. I am thine, Mother, be thou eternally mine. I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause.
I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause.
Now, this second part, she will read, and then you will repeat after her.
Okay, I'll do this again. I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause.
I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause.
And to the ray of the divine light as it is represented by your channels. Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, and Paramahansa Yogananda. Accept me into this family of self-realization. And make me also, through them, an instrument of thy blessings. Thus, as I receive, may others be blessed also to receive. I will join my energies to those of my Guruvais, my spiritual family on earth. I will cooperate with them, and especially with the living representatives and guides of my divine line of gurus. Discipline me, guide me, purify me, Teach me to attune myself to thy ray, until at last, through daily meditation, service and devotion, I unite my soul with thy infinite spirit. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.
Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai. Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai Guru, Jai. Paramhansa Yogananda, Jai Guru, Jai.
Let's all now stand. Let's raise our arms and feel the blessings of the Gurus flowing into us, and may they flow through us, empowering us to be disciples in His name, sharing His blessings, the blessings of all the Gurus, the great ones, the avatars, to souls everywhere. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great Masters and Gurus, beloved Swamiji, may we ever serve Thy work in joy, in Thy light, in Thy blessings, flow through us to many souls. Om Shanti, Shanti.